Hey everyone, and thanks for jumping back into the Cryptoverse. Today, we're going to talk about Bitcoin, and we're going to be discussing the Relative Strength Index, or RSI. If you guys like the content, make sure you subscribe to the channel, give the video a thumbs up, and check out the Black Friday sale on Into the Cryptoverse Premium at intothecryptoverse.com. Let's go ahead and jump in. So, the RSI is something that we check in with every few months, and used by itself is probably not a great indicator. And the reason for that is because markets can stay overbought for very long periods of time. The way the RSI works is it basically, goes from 0 to 100, and if it's below 30, then it's considered to be technically oversold, and if it's above 70, then it's considered to be overbought. Now, if you look at the chart, whenever it goes below 30, it has been a pretty good time to buy. January 2015, December 2018, and June of 2022. Now, obviously, June 2022 wasn't the actual low. And in the summer of 2022, we said that there would likely be at least one more drop into Q4, and there was at least one more. But all in all, anytime the weekly RSI has gone below 30, it has been a good time to buy Bitcoin. However, the reverse is not always true. Just because the RSI on the weekly goes above 70 doesn't always mean it's a good time to sell. There are plenty of examples where it stays above 70 for very long periods of time. For instance, in June of 2016, it got above 70 and it continued on, actually in May, and it continued on into June. And had you sold when it crossed 70, you would have ended up selling here. But by the time there was a pullback, it was still a pullback to a higher low. So some of the times the RSI will stay overbought for very long periods of time. Also, in October of 2020, you can see the weekly RSI went above 70. If you sold your Bitcoin at that point, you would have sold it at around $13,000. However, we know that shortly after that, Bitcoin rallied all the way up to $64,000. And again, in October 2023, the weekly RSI, when it broke through, it was at around 34K, 35K. Had you sold at that point, you can see there was never really a time to sort of get back in at that level. So the reason why the RSI, you have to be careful with it, is because it does tend to work when it goes below 30 on the weekly, but just because it goes above 70 doesn't always mean that the reverse is true, right? Buying below 30 is not always, is a much better strategy historically than selling above 70. Now, one of the things to consider, and we actually talked about the weekly RSI just a few months ago. Here's the video from, the last time we talked about the RSI. We sort of talked about how it had retraced to the level that it was at in August of 2023. And we were discussing whether that would provide support or not, in the 50 to 60K range. So if we go look at that, right, if we take a look at that again, let's pull up the RSI once more. And here we are on the weekly. And what you'll notice is that it did find support at that exact level, right? I mean, going back to the video, here was the same spot it found support at in August of 2023. And if you draw the line across the page, you can see that that's also where the weekly RSI found support. So it makes me wonder if we will find ourselves at a weekly RSI of around 44 again in perhaps August of 2025. This seems to be a pretty important level. And you'll notice that every bull market, there is sort of an equivalent level that the weekly RSI tries to hold above. In the 2016-2017 cycle, it was around 54. This cycle, it's been around 44. In the 2016-2017 cycle, it didn't break below 54 until the midterm year. Okay, the midterm year until January of 2018. And you can see that it came back down to this level in January 2016 and in August of 2016 and in March of 2017 and in July of 2017. So it went down there several times. There's always a chance that it goes back down there before August of 2025, right? There's always a chance. You can see in 2016, it certainly made more moves back down there. So I wouldn't completely dismiss that idea. But the RSI it's an indicator that should be used in confluence with other indicators. It should not be used by itself. Because again, if you use it by itself and you try to figure out when does it make sense to buy or sell, there's even if you don't use 70 as your target, I mean, even if you use 80, there are plenty of times where it just continues to run after it breaks through 80. Now, what I'd like to do is look at it on a slightly longer time frame, the 2-week time frame. Now, this is something we also spoke about in the last video. We've made a lot of comparisons to prior cycles before. One of the prior cycles that we've made comparisons to was the 2013 cycle. And the reason for that is because there was sort of a major top in April, and then there was a summer lull, just like we got this time. And then there was another rally that sort of went up into November. Now, I'm not suggesting it's going to play out the exact same way. Again, this was, April to November. And then this time it was actually March, and it's now already November. But the reason why the 2-week RSI is interesting is because it historically doesn't really pass through these diminishing peaks. We've talked a lot about diminishing peaks, and the 2-week RSI is a great example where every time it gets to this trend line, it feels like it can't go down, and then you look back at it and it's like, oh, it did go down from that point. And we actually talked a lot about this and how if it emulates 2013, it could find support around a very similar level, right? Where it's basically getting a first peak back down to this level and then back up. And now you can see it's currently going back up. Now, one of the things to remember is that every cycle is slightly different. There's no guarantee that the 2-week RSI just goes straight up to the top of the trend line, right? There's no guarantee that it does this. It could do something else, right? Maybe it comes up, comes back down, and then goes up. Or maybe it, goes up, down, and then goes back up again. There's no way to know. But the point is that anytime it has hit this trend line, the 2-week RSI hasn't gone really beyond that. Now, one thing to keep in mind is that in 2021, when it hit this trend line, the price of Bitcoin did go slightly higher as the 2-week RSI went slightly down. So there was some divergence there. But, this is an interesting metric here. And if you actually throw that moving average back up, the RSI-based moving average, I believe, let me pull it up here. I believe what ended up happening was, maybe it was a little bit different, but I mean, you can see that this moving average, came up, came back down, and then ended up getting a lower high. So we'll see, we'll see what happens with the 2-week RSI, but this is one that I have watched, and I only really focus on it a lot when the 2-week RSI gets near that level, right? And so I would just keep an eye on it, because it is slowly getting back up to that level. It's currently at around a 2-week RSI of 74, 75. Up here is around 87 or so. And this is actually what also helped us to identify the mid-cycle top back in March. When a lot of people were very, very bullish back then, and it seemed like the price of Bitcoin couldn't go down. You look at this chart and you're like, oh, well, it basically hit the same trend line that it always does. And after hitting that trend line, we got a significant pullback. So certainly an interesting chart to keep in mind. And then the other thing, the one of the things that helped me figure out that 73K was more so a mid-cycle top rather than a market cycle top. Because if you look at the 2-week RSI, you might have assumed, well, what if that had been the market cycle top? I mean, I guess it's possible it could have been, but it wasn't. I mean, we've already seen Bitcoin go up to almost 100K. And one of the things that made me think it was more likely to be a mid-cycle top rather than a market cycle top was if you look at the monthly RSI, you can see that that same trend line was never actually hit, right? So if you look at the monthly RSI, you can see that it didn't go all the way up to that trend line. So that was one of the things we talked about back then, and we actually did a video on it, I believe, back in March, as well, where we were looking at this and saying, like, it doesn't really seem like the monthly RSI is too far gone to warrant a market cycle top, but it seems like the 2-week RSI is too far gone to merit another immediate rally, and therefore we would likely see the market cool off for, as I said back then, approximately 6 to 9 months. It turns out it was about 7 to 8 months. So now the monthly RSI is actually getting pretty close to where it was back in March. And in fact, if you look, when Bitcoin was at 100K or near 100K, these two levels were actually basically equivalent. So I would perhaps keep an eye on that one as well. But the reason why I like the RSI is not because I really use it to trade, but because whenever I'm looking at other indicators that are telling me certain things and I want sort of some level of confluence, some of the times I'll go over to the RSI and to see if it gives me that confluence, right? Is it telling me the market is overheated, right? Like back in March when gold broke out and USDT dominance hit its trend line, it felt like we should be due for a pullback, right? And in terms of looking for confluence, I was able to go look at the 2-week RSI and confirm that view that, hey, we probably will get a pullback here. So again, the RSI, as I see it, should not be used by itself to buy and sell Bitcoin, but it could be used as confluence with other indicators to help give you some insight into what's going on in the market. That'll wrap it up for this video. If you guys like the content, make sure you subscribe, give the video a thumbs up, and again, check out the sale on Into the Cryptoverse Premium at intothecryptoverse.com. We will continue to run that Black Friday sale for a little while longer. I'll see you guys next time. Bye.